welcome to our next panel discussion. My name is Anne-Marie. I'm from Interactive Selection, a global recruiter based in London, and it's my pleasure to be here today to introduce Mark Flanagan, who is giving us a presentation entitled Weapons of Mass Construction or Destruction? Construction. Okay. Mark started life as a baby, and then he became a fully qualified architect, specialising in visualisation. Following that, his interest in 3D art took him to take on studies in Dublin. And he's since spent 3 years in the games industry, working for major players such as Codemasters, Transmission, and Freestyle. Thank you. He's credited on some major products, including the Colin McRae franchise, Heatseeker, and Heroes of the Pacific. And I hope you'll join me in giving Mark a very big hand and welcome this afternoon.
Greetings. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. I'll find my way around here for a second. I'll just jump into this. This is a bit more of my bio. Yes, I've worked in these things. I'm currently teaching at the AIE. And I'm not associated with any of the pieces of software I'll be showing you today. I'm not a salesman, but if people want to give me money for people buying the product, I will take anything that's offered. So, what we're looking at today is procedural content generation for games. What we're going to look at is broad strokes, what procedural content is it new, why we need it, why we should use it, is it going to put us out of work as artists, what you can do procedurally, when you can use it in your creative process, and then there's going to be a large amount of video content, which hopefully will all work on this, and then we'll have some questions. So, for the broad strokes, we're going to be looking at some of the history, principles and techniques, videos in action, and we won't be doing anything very specific, as this is not a tutorial or a masterclass. So if you have any specific questions, I can give you links to sites which will answer lots of these. You can get demos, you can actually get full versions as well as software as well. People here know what procedural content is? Some of you, hopefully, yes. So it's content which is generated by algorithmic process rather than by direct input. And basically mathematical formula which can be either defined rules, for instance grammars, or randomized functions such as fractals and L systems. It's really, really useful because almost anything in the world can be described procedurally. If you consider that everybody here is actually a result of procedures. Human DNA is a procedure for making human beings. It's not a blueprint. It's a set of rules which actually make a person. If you have twins, they are virtually the same, but they're using the same DNA to create them. And there are slight differences between them because even though they share exactly the same set of procedures, at some points, because of mathematical randomness, they will have slightly different things. One of my friends used to tell the difference between two of my neighbours who were twins because they had slightly different ears. One of them had different curl in his ear, and that's the only way to tell them apart. So even the same DNA, which is a procedural method of creating things, will produce slight variations. Fractals. Yes, fractals are everywhere. Fractals are in trees, fractals are in human beings, landscapes. Almost anything that occurs in the natural world can be described using fractals. And this is one of my favourite fractal illustrations. So you're not just wrong, you're wrong at every conceivable scale of resolution. Zooming in on any part of your worldview finds beliefs exactly as wrong as your entire worldview. So fractals are basically self-replicating patterns, which you can take a large pattern, for instance, a tree, and you can subdivide that into smaller sections and smaller sections and smaller sections, and there are repeating patterns within this. Similarly with human being, with your blood system or with your nervous system, there are branching structures within this which replicate further down you actually go until they reach basically a molecular level. And even with trees, people have done research recently that trees and the way in which they grow in a landscape is related to the fractal nature of the tree itself. So it's not just from the tree down to the leaf and down to the little veins in the leaf, it's actually the way in which it interacts with the landscape. There are a couple of different types of fractals. I'm not going to go hugely into the maths because I don't understand all of it. The two most basic types are deterministic, which are ones which will produce pretty patterns, but they will be very geometrical. So if you can think of snowflakes, for the example of a naturally occurring fractal, which is deterministic, and statistical, which doesn't produce stuff which is quite as regular. It's basically more randomness built in, but it still has patterns which recur. And again, these are big words for anybody who understands programming stuff. The two different types of algorithms are teleological, which creates an accurate physical model of the environment and the process, and then runs the simulation, which will produce something which should be similar to the actual nature of the object which has been defined by that system. The second type is probably more useful to what we do in the games industry. It's ontogenetic. They're really funny words. This observes the end results of a process and then attempts to directly reproduce it. So it's basically saying, okay, so this looks like a human. What kind of things can we do to make a human look like a human? Rather than going down to the level of DNA, it basically works the opposite way around, and hopefully you'll get results which are human-like. So, procedural context has been around for ages, absolute ages. Some of the first games made for home use, and even on mainframes, used procedural generation. The reason being, you wanted a large environment. You couldn't physically do it in the amount of memory that you had available. So having procedure which produces the environment and the objects and your enemies actually meant you could have more gameplay within your environment and actually create more fun. So anybody here play Elite? Yeah? Still playing it? But there's a huge amount of information in there in a very, very small space. And that is very useful, even in today's environment, procedurally generating within the actual engine. This is another one which is quite early, Essential. Anybody play Essential? Yes, I'm very impressed. So it's down to the ZX Spectrum at the top and two Amiga versions there. I think there's like 10,000 levels in this. Something ridiculously large, considering the amount of space which the actual program took up. It would have been absolutely impossible to create these games without using procedural generation. And it's being used today in quite a few games. Like, if we look at Spore, Fuel, Just Cause, they all use procedural generation techniques. Now the reasons for this, it's not just one reason, there's a few. Current generation consoles, people are expecting huge amounts of content. Absolutely gigantic amounts of content, which is taking ever-increasing amounts of artists to produce and level designers to put in place. It becomes implausible to actually create an awful lot of this stuff. If we go through to the next slide here, this is a game which is entirely procedurally generated by a guy called Rhys Paul Hovey, which I believe he actually lives in Melbourne now. Everybody knows him. Everything in this game is procedural, and it's not quite infinite, but it's actually pretty good. It's an indie game. The music is procedural, the gameplay is procedural, the levels, the colours, everything is procedural, and it fits in a tiny space. So it's taken what's been used in Elite and brought it up to date. And Fuel, so you play Fuel. It's not a fantastic game, I believe. I'm not saying anything about it. It's not one of these top-rated games. But the size of the environment, which is within the game, is 128 kilometers per side. And just doing some quick estimates here, that's probably about 16 billion points or so. And if you just work through those calculations, you'd be looking at 40 DVDs worth of information just for the environment.